Seven fantasy adaptations that did and didn't pull it off. You've probably seen or heard something about the fantasy genre the last few years. Whether you saw a new trailer or you have a friend who's constantly recommending you new shows, fantasy has gone from a respite for nerd culture to the most mainstream entertainment available. The GOT prequel House of the Dragon is the most discussed show on television, coming directly on the heels of an adaptation of Neil Gaiman's long-running comic The Sandman. Before that, and last year alone, was Good Omens, another Gaiman series, Wheel of Time, Rings of Power, and Dune. Within the last 2 or 3, you have to include His Dark Materials, The Witcher, and even adaptations of fantasy video games like League of Legends Arcane.
Why did you leave me? Because you're a jinx! Do you hear me?
These haven't been shoestring budgets either. Nearly every one of these stories is a big-budget endeavor backed by huge studio money, with Rings of Power being the most notable for its nearly billion-dollar production cost. Why is fantasy so popular now? Why did Amazon risk spending $1 billion on a show? While the reasons for the consumer side of the genre's popularity are too many and varied to get into, the suppliers' reasons are straightforward.
Shut up and take my money!
One reason is that the market for it has been proven. With the enormous success of Game of Thrones, executives clearly conned to the fact the audience didn't have a problem with getting to the lore and complicated world building of a show, previously thought to be niche, so long as those storylines were compelling.
I am so going to enjoy this.
Of course, executives first caught wind of the genre's potential with Harry Potter, and since then, it's been a race to find the best source material to adapt to screen. The number of fantasy adaptations since Harry Potter has been increasing steadily for years, becoming exponential upon the serendipity of Game of Thrones and the number of streaming platforms willing to fund them. With high budgets and high expectations, here are some fantasy adaptations that have tried the genre since the Game of Thrones era first began, with varying degrees of success.
Percy, no!
These dismal film adaptations only make the list out of disappointment, and to look forward to the Disney Plus series in the works. The widely popular book series got only 2 movies of 5 books before the train wreck came to a halt. Author Rick Riordan was notoriously dissatisfied with his adaptations, giving Disney's overall neglect of his input, and rightly so.
Not everyone who looks like a hero is a hero, and not everyone who looks like a monster is a monster.
Instead of straightforward adaptation, director Chris Columbus made his cast, Logan Lerman, Alexandra Daddario, much older and changed the story from a coming of age to a muddled teen wolf type drama. Luckily, it looks like the new series has made a number of good casting decisions and are involving Riordan heavily, so the hit fantasy series may be getting its justice. Here's to hoping that happens.
Amidst their duel unending, lightning ensnared the tree.
Evidenced by Amazon disabling comments on their billion-dollar attraction, reviews for Rings of Power are not what they hoped. The series, while the narrative is not adapted from any specific Tolkien narrative, is adapted from source material from the Lord of Rings lore, an age before Frodo and Aragorn. As many predicted when it was first announced, it'd be impossible to live up to its predecessor, and no doubt that's been the case. Despite sophisticated CGI and some impressive visuals, the series ultimately lacks the Tolkien morals that made the series so good to begin with. The writing is fine and good at times, but the most expensive show ever made can't help feel like a knockoff.
What is it that kills hope?
The Sandman was a long gestating project and one of Gaiman's crown jewels of his many works. Thankfully, the long development time was not in vain, as a strange, dreamy series following Morpheus, the Lord of Dreams, reflects the signature Gaiman combination of creepy and surreal. The cast includes big names like Charles Dance, Gwendolyn Christie, and Patton Oswalt, while Tom Sturridge does a wonderfully idiosyncratic rendition of Morpheus. This adaptation is worth watching for its atmosphere alone, and the writing coasts largely off of Gaiman's involvement in the project, so it's as honest to the source as it gets.
Submit to
Leigh Bardugo's underrated Grishaverse is a much-desired amplification in this Netflix series. Mixing elements from Shadow and Bone series and Her Six Crows duology, the series follows Alina Starkov, who's heralded as the Sun Summoner, as she battles against the darkness. In a world divided by a tall, shadowy wall known as the Fold, Alina and her friends are forced to enter the Fold, and the first season follows Alina's navigation of the friends and enemies that she encounters there, as she learns to control her powers.
For your face.
It's royal cast starring Ben Barnes, Jesse Maylee, and Freddie Carter as Kaz Brecker, and as fanatical as it sounds. The world building is well done and meticulous, doing the books their service. Watch out for season 2.
I fight for the possibilities of understanding, truth, and acceptance.
The HBO adaptation doesn't stray far from Philip Pullman's original trilogy and enjoys the upsides of an insightful and compelling story. The series follows Lyra and her quest to liberate her friends and expose the dark truths of the Magisterium, the shadowy organization that runs the world. Filled with contemporary political critiques as well as magical elements, His Dark Materials is the kind of adaptation that manages to match the ethos of the original source text. Smart, exciting, mystical, and entertaining, this adaptation will keep you engaged.
Were you attacked because you're different?
Sure.
One of the more buzzed about fantasy adaptations in the last several years, The Witcher starring Henry Cavill as Geralt of Rivia is based on the Polish book series by Andrzej Sapkowski. An outcast, Geralt makes a living slaying monsters of all sorts around the kingdom. Soon though, he discovers his fate is intertwined with the young princess and Yennefer of Bingerberg. An offbeat fantasy story, the hero is witty and curmudgeonly and hardly likes people. As long as it's a story about a guy killing monsters, it's a story about a pariah's journey to accepting himself and the world he lives in. That being said, the monster killing makes for some classic fantasy action that never gets old. If you're looking for another season of Game of Thrones, don't watch House of the Dragon. Based on the account of the Targaryen family civil war from J.R.R. Martin's historical nonfiction book Fire and Blood, the show does not rely on novels like its predecessor, so don't expect the singular dialogue, character development, and political insight that Thrones had. It's forced TV writers to do all that work. That being said, HOTD has carved out its own voice that is not quite the caliber of Thrones, but is compelling nonetheless. Despite a questionable decision to switch actors mid-season, the show has benefited from good acting from the likes of Paddy Considine and others, as well as, dragons. This adaptation is more like historical fiction, yet manages to satisfy the fantasy elements all the same.